One of the questions we can ask is, are we facing a similar situation today? Now that might be, I mean, it's 3,200 years, but let me ask you, is there climate change today? Most people now would say yes. Famines and droughts somewhere in the world? Absolutely. Earthquakes going on? Yes. Rebellions? Sure. In fact, I think the only thing we're missing are the sea peoples. And in fact, I'm not so sure we're missing the sea peoples, because there could be two different groups that you can interpret as the sea peoples. They could either be ISIS, or they could be the refugees that have fled from Syria and elsewhere that are now in Europe. It depends if you see the sea peoples as victims or oppressors, or maybe both.
Manuel Manal Mehta, I think, asks, what could they have done in 1177 to prevent the collapse?
Good question. I've been wondering that myself. What could they have done to prevent the collapse?
Who would be the they in this case?
And who would be the they? Yes.
Might be Egypt.
In fact, I think Egypt did prepare. If Ugarit is destroyed between 1190 and 1185, which we think, and the Sea Peoples don't wind up in Egypt until 1177, that gives them a good 7 to 10 to 15 years to figure it out. So I think Egypt was plenty prepared. In fact, there's some new evidence by a colleague of mine that thinks the land battle, there's a land battle and a naval battle, and she thinks the land battle was actually fought earlier up in Syria, and that it was kind of an offensive defense, right? Go protect your country.
And Egypt sort of reached
up.
And
the Egyptians went all the way up, and then later they fought the naval battle down below. So I do think that they had some time to prepare, and I think that's probably why they were successful. Others, what can you do if your supply of a crucial raw material is cut off? It can be difficult. If you're hit by an earthquake, I don't know anything that can prepare you for that. So I'm not so sure it was possible to have survived it. And this is one thing that I would say, if an earthquake hits, you can survive it. If a famine hits, you can survive it. I mean, people will die, but you can survive it. A drought? Yeah. Invaders? Yes. Somebody always survives. But what if you have 1, then 2, then 3, and then 4? What if you have the perfect storm? That also gets you a multiplier effect, right? Where everything is going to get worse and worse and worse. And I think that's what we've got here. So I think if it had been just a famine, they could have survived it. They've done that before. We know they had a famine back in the 14th century. They survived it. We know there's invaders. They've survived it. But when you've got them all at once, so there, how do you prepare for that? And I'm not sure that you can.
So you've got a sort of cascading effects. You've got a chaos leading to chaos. You mentioned 4 things in your slide: the sort of loss of the administrative center, the loss of kind of an economic apparatus, the loss of the elites, and I forget what the other...
Right, the population declines and movements.
So do the cities really empty out in these circumstances, or what happens?
Some of them did. Some of them did. They're actually population movements. And in fact, that's what Rhys Carpenter was basing himself on. He didn't have the data about the pollen and everything, but he did notice the population shifts. And he said one of the only reasons that could have caused it was drought, and then the whole thing collapsed. So indeed...
So people go away from drought. That makes a lot of sense. And they go away from chaos, but toward what?
Right. Ironically, however, one of the major suggestions is that if the Sea Peoples, the Shardana and the Shekelash, really did come from Sardinia and Sicily, which I do adhere to that. I don't think they went there afterward. I think they came from there. The hypothesis is that there was an original drought up in Europe or in Western Mediterranean that started them moving, in which case they had the worst rotten luck, because they're moving from one drought into another drought on the Eastern Mediterranean. And what do you do if you have a 300-year-long drought? That's pretty hard to survive.
Famously. So Egypt goes into a steep decline, is the way you described it. Say a little more about that. So even though they were prepared and they're the ones that survived, what does survival mean under these circumstances?
In this particular case, there is still upheaval and turmoil and rebellions in Egypt. Everything is not hunky-dory, but they do survive.